Hi, everyone. How are you doing today? Great. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk to you about nourishing the future and to share with you my space story. But before we get into my story, I want to know a little bit about you. And my first question to you in the audience is, would you go to space? Raise your hand if you'd go to space. Raise your hand and look around. Look, wait, you didn't even hesitate. You were like, before I even finished, raise your hand nice and high if you would go to space. Now look around and see all of the people. This side of the house is really like, yeah, the whole corner is like, I would go. I love seeing all the women and their hands going up and saying yes. And so when we think about that question about space exploration, for a lot of us, that love of space begins really early. And for me, I had been chasing space my entire life. And then suddenly in 2021, this happened.
The day of launch, I'm going to be thinking about how my entire life has led up to this moment. I was born on the island of Guam, and the reason why I was born there is that my dad worked for the NASA tracking station. And so I feel like space has always been a part of me. When I got that call, that Zoom, and Jared was on there and he said that, they picked me for the prosperity seat, that I was going to go to space with him and be part of the Inspiration 4, it really was like getting the golden ticket for Willy Wonka. Everything in my life finally came into focus, and I realized that it was all about this moment in time. I won the prosperity seat for Inspiration 4, and I did that not as a geoscientist or an explorer or an analog astronaut, which are all on my resume. I actually won this as a poet and an artist. We are striving for that Star Trek generation, that idea of a just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive space, or a Jedi space. I'm gonna be the first Black female pilot of a spacecraft ever. And to me, that just blows me away. And I wanna encourage the next generation to dream that this is possible. And a Jedi space, that's what that's about. I'm Dr. Sian Proctor, and I'm the mission pilot for Inspiration 4.
So that's how my life changed in 2021. But how did I go from that childhood dream to actually making it a reality? Well, it began by getting flight ready. And so in the video, it talked about how I was born on the island of Guam. Has anybody here been to Guam? Couple of people have been to Guam. And the reason why I was born on the island of Guam is because my dad was working for the NASA tracking station during the Apollo missions. So I had been chasing space my entire life. Because my dad was working for NASA during the moon landing, that made it part of my history. When Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon in 1969, I was born 8.5 months later, so I consider myself to be a moon celebration baby as a result of that. There might be other moon celebration babies here. If you were born in 1970 in March or April, you too are a moon celebration baby. So I literally am born from space exploration. And I grew up, with this love of NASA and the dream of going to space. And so, like a lot of us, we have this childhood dream of wanting to go to space, but achieving it is so difficult. As of right now, in all of human history, only about 700 people have gone to space. Out of everyone, billions and billions of people, only 700 people have achieved that dream. It's incredibly difficult to do. But what I'm going to talk to you about is how that's changing and how access is opening up. And my story is an example of that. But to get flight ready, I actually went off to school and became a geoscientist. I became a geology professor traveling all around the world. In fact, the last time I was in Hong Kong was in 2004. I actually did a faculty exchange to mainland China in Guangzhou at Wuyi University. And then I backpacked all through China back then. And so this is my second time coming back, but it's been a long time, so 20 years ago. But the thing about, when we think about getting flight ready, what really made a difference in my life is the fact that my parents encouraged me to be lifelong learners. Neither my dad or my mom had college degrees. Even though my dad was smart enough to work at the NASA tracking station, it was all because he was self-taught. He loved math and science, and that got him to be able to go and get a position working at the tracking station on Guam. So he really instilled this love of learning and knowledge in me and my siblings, and I went off and became Dr. Proctor. So that photo on the left was taken the day that I got my PhD from Arizona State University. But my learning didn't stop there. I went off and I got scuba certified because I love the ocean and exploration. I had always wanted to fly when I was a kid, so I got my pilot's license. And then I traveled and taught around the world. And unbeknownst to me, what I was doing was I was getting flight ready. I was getting ready for the opportunity when it came. And that first opportunity came in 2009. In 2009, I was working, it's actually started in 2008. I'd been a geoscience professor for about a decade, and somebody emailed me and said, NASA's looking for astronauts, you should apply. Think about that. I had been living a life where friends and family knew that I wanted to go to space. And so when NASA announced that they were looking for astronauts, somebody reached out and said, hey, you should apply to become a NASA astronaut. Now, at the time, I was 38, turning 39. So I thought to myself, oh, there's no way NASA's going to pick me to be an astronaut. That voice inside your head will always kind of fuel you with doubt and tell you that you're not good enough. And so my first thought was like, they're never going to pick me. I shouldn't even apply. And then I thought about what my dad would say. And my dad would say, don't talk yourself out of opportunity. Let somebody else decide if you're qualified. So I applied for the 2009 NASA astronaut selection process. And to my surprise, out of thousands of applicants, 3,500 people applied that year. I made the qualified, and then I made the highly qualified. And then the next thing you know, I'm being invited to Johnson Space Center for first round interviews. 110 people out of thousands got invited. And that photo that you see there was taken the day I arrived at Johnson Space Center with other potential astronaut candidates. And so you can imagine my excitement because I'm like, I can't believe I'm here, and for that dream of a little girl of wanting to go to space. And now I'm at Johnson Space Center with a real shot of becoming a NASA astronaut. And so you're at Johnson Space Center for first round interviews, and those last 3 days. And then you go home and you wait for a phone call. And that phone call is to invite you back to Johnson Space Center to become a finalist for the astronaut selection process. Now, I've had imposter syndrome my entire life, that voice inside your head that tells you you're not good enough. So, of course, after the first round interviews, I went home and I'm like, well, that was great. They're never going to select me. And to my surprise, my phone rang one day, and it was Johnson Space Center saying, we would like to invite you back for a full week. You are now a finalist for the NASA astronaut selection process. And so I show up and I have this amazing week where I'm surrounded by fighter pilots and medical doctors and all of these amazing other candidates. And we're all trying to be selected to be an astronaut. And then out of the 47 finalists, NASA chose 9 people out of 47 finalists. And the way it happens is after you have that final week at Johnson Space Center, you go home and you wait. You wait for the yes/no phone call. And so you can imagine, you don't know. Are they going to call today? Are they going to call tomorrow? When are they calling? And then one day, your phone rings. And it's NASA. And it's a yes/no phone call. And how many of you heard about the NASA astronauts that got stuck up on the International Space Station? The astronauts that got stuck up in space, right? One of them was astronaut Sunny Williams. Well, when my phone rang, it was her on the other end. And she said, "Sorry, we didn't select you." Think about that. Sorry, we didn't select you. And you just, that childhood dream of coming so close to being selected as a NASA astronaut, and your heart just sinks when you get that no phone call because you wanted it so badly. And so for me, again, that imposter syndrome voice kicked in and was like, see, you're not good enough. You need to go and get your advanced scuba certification. You need to go and get your advanced pilot's license. You need to get another degree. And I started thinking about, how do I make myself better to fit what NASA is looking for? And I started to change my life and turn my life upside down, chasing what I thought NASA was looking for. And you know what that's like when you get that no and you're so disappointed, so you start turning your life upside down. And I was literally getting to the point where I was so anxious and so upset that I had to stop. I stopped. And I said to myself, why am I so upset that NASA didn't select me? Maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way. Maybe instead of being disappointed that I got that no phone call, maybe I should instead celebrate the fact that I was almost a NASA astronaut. Think about that. Thousands of people applied, and I got down to the less than 1%. A lot of times when we get the no, we're so disappointed in the fact that we got the no that we don't take time to celebrate that we even put ourselves out there for the opportunity, that we even gave ourselves a chance. And so when I started to celebrate the fact that I was almost a NASA astronaut, because how many people can say that, right? How many people can say, I got down to the yes/no phone call with NASA? And so when I started to celebrate that, everything changed. And I could look back at the year-long interview process. It literally was 1 year. From the time I applied to the time I got the yes/no phone call was 1 entire year. And I could look back at this experience and I could see so much joy in going through the astronaut selection process. And when I started to celebrate that, and instead of seeing it as a negative and a no, and saying, wow, I have the right stuff to be a NASA astronaut. Even though they didn't select me, I got down to the yes/no phone call. And I got to meet all kinds of astronauts. I got to get training. And even that picture in the lower left, I had this medical. That's my brain. That's an actual MRI photo of my brain. And they said it was grossly normal. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but they're like, she's grossly normal. But this became such an important pivot point in my life because I started to celebrate this amazing year of almost being selected by NASA, and that enabled me to move forward in a much more healthy way when it came to thinking about space exploration. Now, keep in mind, when I got the no phone call, I was 39 years old. NASA has only picked one woman over 40 in their entire 60 years of existence. So I knew that my chances of ever becoming a NASA astronaut were now over. There wasn't going to be a second chance with NASA. But I thought to myself, okay, if I can't be a NASA astronaut up there in space, maybe I can still contribute to the space exploration community by becoming what's called an analog astronaut. How many of you have heard of an analog astronaut before? Anybody? An analog astronaut is somebody who voluntarily lives in Moon and Mars simulations here on Earth. So surprisingly, there are all of these Moon and Mars simulations all over the world. And I became an analog astronaut in 2013. And the first analog that I lived in was this white dome called High Seas on the big island of Hawaii. And the reason why it was a brand new analog site, and the reason why I lived in that dome was because it was funded by NASA to investigate food strategies for long duration spaceflight. NASA is very interested in how are we going to feed people when we go to the moon and Mars. So they're thinking about the future. We don't, what are they going to eat? What is it going to be like? So they put out a call. They put out a call on the internet saying, hey, we've got this new Mars simulation on the big island of Hawaii, and you can see how it's very Mars-like. There's no trees. It sits about 8,000 feet on the slopes of Mauna Loa. In the far background, that's Mauna Kea there, and it's about 900 square foot. And they're like, all right, we want volunteers to come and live in this dome for 4 months. 4 months to investigate food strategies for long duration spaceflight. So you're going to go in and you're going to act like you're living on Mars, but the purpose of being in that analog is to investigate food. And so why food, right? Why is NASA willing to put all of this money into food? There's a couple of reasons. One is thinking about how do we preserve food, how do we make it so we can feed people on Moon and Mars, or even just in low Earth orbit. And so food has had an interesting history with NASA because NASA does not want astronauts to get sick in space. Think about foodborne illnesses. And so NASA has spent a lot of money and technology in how do we make it so that we can send food to space and not have that food end up getting astronauts sick. And so food preservation is a big part of this. Health and nutrition. Moment you get into space, your body starts to change. You start to lose muscle mass. Your bones start to leach calcium and become more brittle. And so making it so that you have these astronauts, the best of the best in space, how do you keep them healthy and nutritious? Especially when they suffer from menu fatigue. Menu fatigue. So what is menu fatigue? Menu fatigue is when you get up into space, everything shifts in your body. Think about that. You don't have gravity pulling you down. So everything shifts. All the fluids in your body even out and distribute in your body. So your face becomes puffy and your nose becomes nasally and you get a headache. And as a result of all of this fluid shifting, food doesn't taste the same. Think about that. Your favorite food here on Earth might not taste the same in space because of that fluid shift. So now when you're going to eat and you want to eat something that's familiar and you take a bite of it while you're floating in space, it now doesn't taste the same. It doesn't have that same flavor. And what they found was NASA, the astronauts weren't eating as much. Also, your digestive system slows down. You can eat and swallow and drink in space, but what happens is because you're floating in space, it moves through your digestive system slower. And so NASA was like, okay, we have this menu fatigue. How do we get enough calories inside an astronaut so that they can maintain their health and their weight? And then culture. food and culture. Something that we don't actually talk about enough is how food, culture, and mood are all tied together. Think about just today what you ate for maybe breakfast or lunch. Think about the choice you made in your food. Think about who you ate your last meal with. Think about all of the conversations and the activities and the events that you've had in your life around food, that was centered around food. And think about how you feel when you eat your favorite meal, right? Now you think about that culture. And so here, this is a picture from the International Space Station. The astronauts are having a meal together. And, you know, one of the things that you don't need in space, because you can float in any orientation, is you don't need a table. But you can see that they have a makeshift table because there's something about sitting around a table and having food together that's so important to us as a species. And so how do we maintain that as we go not just to low Earth orbit, but on to the moon and Mars and beyond? And so these are the reasons why NASA came in and said, hey, we're gonna fund a food study. And we're gonna look at how astronauts are eating in space right now, and we're gonna compare that to the future of eating on the moon and Mars. And so the history of food in space has been really, really cool. If you look at the top left image, the tube right there, that's how early astronauts ate, by squeezing a paste-like substance from a tube into their mouth. Now, doesn't that sound good, right? And so that was early space food, but we've come a long way. As you can see in the lower right-hand corner, that's how NASA astronauts eat now, is they have tortillas and they can put different packaged meats that have been heated up in there and wrap them up and eat them. But the basis of all of their food is pre-packaged food that you just add water and heat. So there's no creative cooking happening. How many of you love to cook? Raise your hand if you love to cook meals, right? If you love to cook, imagine not being able to cook anymore. That everything that you eat is going to be already pre-prepared, and you're just going to add water and heat it up and then eat it. So think about that loss of creativity. So now in low Earth orbit, why it makes it so challenging is that everything floats in low Earth orbit. So if it's not Velcroed down, it's going to float in the capsule. So eating and having it packaged and manageable is one of the ways in which we do it now. However, what about on the moon or Mars? When we go to the moon, it's 1/10 of Earth's gravity, but you have gravity. When we go to Mars, it's 1/3 of Earth's gravity. Again, you have gravity. Now that you have gravity, that means you can creatively cook. That means you can do more things. And so this is my high seas crew. In 2013, we came together, complete strangers from around the world. My commander is on the left. That's Angelo Vermiglia. He is Belgium. And then there's me, and then there's Jahaira, our science officer, and she's from Puerto Rico. And then next to her is Oleg, and he grew up in Russia until he was 13 years old, and he was our geoscientist. And then there was Kate, she was from the United States, a physicist turned poet. And then on the end was Simon from Canada. None of us knew each other. We all applied to voluntarily live in this NASA-funded Mars simulation for 4 months to investigate food strategies for long-duration spaceflight. And so we came in, and what NASA was interested in was this. NASA astronauts have pre-prepared meals that you just add water to and heat. So on the left, the one that says Mountain House, that is a pre-prepared meal. What that means is that you just scoop it out, you add water to it, stir it up, heat it up, and serve it. So everything you need is packaged within that can. And then to the right of that is freeze-dried fruits, meats, and vegetables. And so we came together, and so what NASA wanted to know is like, if you put people in a Mars simulation for 4 months and for 2 days you make them eat pre-prepared meals, and then 2 days you allow them to creatively cook with freeze-dried materials, which one will they prefer in the end? So think about that. For 4 months, 2 days we ate out of a tin can like that, back to back, and then 2 days we were allowed to creatively cook using freeze-dried fruits, meats, and vegetables. And so this is the day that we moved into the high seas habitat for 4 months. Look at all of that. Now, the rules were that all of your food had to be shelf-stable. It had to be shelf-stable for at least a couple of years, because if you're going to Mars, you're going for a couple of years. And that's why we used freeze-dried fruits, meats, and vegetables as our main source of ingredients that we could creatively cook with. How many of you are familiar with freeze-dried fruits, meats, and vegetables? Has anybody? Anybody ever had any freeze-dried, even apples or fruits or any of that? Freeze-dried technology is where you take a vegetable or a fruit, like let's say a blueberry, and when you pick the blueberry or the strawberry, what you do is you put it in a machine and you freeze dry it. What that means is that you're going to reduce the temperature below freezing, and you're going to raise it, and you go from freezing it to raising the temperature and then freezing it again, and you sublimate the water out. Because when you think about food, what is food? Food is water and nutrition. Those are the things that make up food, water and nutrition. So what you do is freeze dry, you take out the water and you leave just the nutrients. That was created by NASA. The first thing that NASA ever made that was freeze dried was coffee. Instant coffee. So if you've ever had instant coffee, you've had freeze-dried food. And so NASA, space technology created this technology to pull the water out of food. Now, think about that. Water is heavy, and to get things up into space is expensive. So the lighter the material is, the easier it is to send it to space. So that's one of the reasons why they freeze dry it. The other thing is microbial growth. How do microbes grow in food? They need water. That's why. So when you take out the water, that food becomes shelf-stable for up to a decade until you want to add that water back in. And so here we are living in the high seas habitat for 4 months, and we're doing this food study. Now you can imagine, which one would you rather have? Would you rather eat out of a tin can where you just add water? Or would you rather have a meal that was creatively cooked using freeze-dried technology foods that you bring together and add spices and cook up? Well, of course, me and my crew, we preferred the freeze-dried creative cooking. And here are a couple of the meal examples that we made with our pantry. Up in the top left is like a hash. It had potatoes and black beans, and we could also make bread. Up on the right corner is spam musubi, and so we had seaweed, and we had spam, and we had rice. And so these are things that we could do while we were in the Mars simulation. In the lower left, soups and stews were very popular. And then, of course, on the right, lower right is an example of a granola bar that we made, all using shelf-stable, freeze-dried foods. And so we lived in this Mars simulation for 4 months, learning about cooking and food, but of course also celebrating milestones. Think about this. If you go to Mars for a couple of years, you're going to have your birthdays there. You're going to have all of your holidays are going to be celebrated there. Think about all of the holidays that you celebrate and the milestones, and how many of them revolve around food. They all revolve around food. And so when we were in the Mars simulation, Jahira had her birthday. And of course we had to bake, a cake and make it special for her. And we had to figure out how to do that using shelf-stable ingredients. And so these are the reasons why NASA is investing so much money and resources around food, because you don't want what we would call hangry, hungry, angry astronauts. Never good in space, right? You want astronauts that are happy and healthy and very nutritious because of the food. And so what did we learn? We learned that culture matters. When you have a diverse group of people coming together, one of the best ways to break down those barriers and create crew cohesion is through food. Oleg was making these amazing Russian dishes, and then Jahira made these amazing Puerto Rican dishes. And so you sit there and you share your culture through food and the memories and the stories around that. But you also build community when you sit at the dinner table and you share a meal. And then the other thing is creativity. I'm going to ask this question again. Who here likes to cook? Raise your hand. Raise your hand high. Don't be shy. Now, who here likes to bake? Anybody? Baking? Now, think about this. How many people raised their hand about cooking? About half of you said, yeah, I like to cook. Half of you said, nah, you kept your hand down. And that's the thing. Some people really love cooking. Other people don't. But one of the things that people who don't like cooking can appreciate sharing a meal that was created by somebody who loves cooking, and vice versa. Now imagine those of you who are creative and you love cooking and you go to the moon and Mars and you can't do that. So NASA is like, we've got to figure out a way how we can keep that creativity around food. And so this study was a lot of fun. I lived there for 4 months with this amazing crew. And as a result of that, I actually published a cookbook called Meals for Mars. And it was all these recipes that I had learned to make using freeze-dried technology. And so these are the things that analog astronauts do, is that they get to be able to help advance human spaceflight, but they do it here on Earth. So I continue to live in these Moon and Mars simulations. And you'll know that the last one I did was in January of 2020. In January of 2020, I went back to the high seas habitat. Now, 2020 was an interesting year for us globally. I was turning 50 in March because, again, I was born in 1970, so I was super excited. I started off the year by going back to high seas. That's me in the orange jumpsuit down there. Every time you left the habitat, you had to have your spacesuit on because you're living on Mars. And I was super excited because I was going to be turning 50 in March, so I get out of the high seas habitat, and I go home, and what happens 2 weeks into March? We all become analog astronauts because we go into a global pandemic and we're locked down in our houses. And so think about that. We are now all kind of like stuck inside, and the world is very uncertain. And what I realized was, from my time living in Moon and Mars simulations, I realized that the thing that keeps me going is creativity. Creativity is my source of inspiration when I'm surrounded by chaos. And so think about the global pandemic. When you went into lockdown, what did you do and how did you survive? How many of you actually started cooking new recipes and learning new things? How many of you picked up a musical instrument during the pandemic? How many of you created a new hobby or something new to do when you were put into that situation? So for me, you know what I did? In 2020, at the age of 50, I became a space artist and a poet. I became a space artist and a poet at 50. I started making space art and sending it around the world in postcards to people I didn't know as a way of spreading cheer globally. And then what happened was I didn't realize that becoming a space poet and artist would change my life. Because now in 2020, I became a space artist and poet. In 2021, February of 2021, they announced the first all-civilian mission to orbit. Okay, think about that. First all-civilian. What does that mean, all-civilian? It means that there were going to be no NASA astronauts. It was going to be 4 regular people who had never gone to space before. They were going to bring them together, and they were going to send them to orbit for 3 days. And you could win a seat to space. So it was a contest. It was a contest to send ordinary people to space. Now, they announced this during the Super Bowl. I'm not a football fan, so I didn't watch the Super Bowl that year. But you can imagine my phone started blowing up as my friends were like, you can win a seat to space. All you have to do is apply for this contest called Inspiration 4. You could go to space. And I was like, wait, okay. So there were 2 seats that they were giving away. One was the generosity seat. And you won the generosity seat by donating to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. If you donated to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in the month of February 2021, your name went into the hat. And they were randomly going to draw one winner from thousands and thousands of people who donate to St. Jude. The second seat was the prosperity seat. And you won the prosperity seat by Twitter. Yes, it was a Twitter contest. You could only win it on Twitter, and you had to do 2 things. You had to open up a shop, an online e-commerce shop, and offer some kind of service. I had just become an artist and a poet, so I was like, okay, I will sell my art online. That was my e-commerce shop, so that was step 1. And step 2, you had to create a 2-minute video and post it on Twitter expressing why they should take you to space. Think about those, all of you that raised your hand and said, I would go to space. Imagine you now have the opportunity to go, but you have to create a 2-minute video expressing why they should take you and not the person next to you. What would you say? What would you want people to know about yourself so that you would be selected? That was the situation I was in 2021. I donated to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and then I had to submit my video on Twitter to get selected to go to space. So you know what I did? I thought to myself, well, I went down the NASA astronaut route as a scientist, a geoscientist, and a teacher, but I had found my authentic voice as an artist and a poet. So I decided to write a poem. And I'm going to read to you the poem that won me my seat to space. Would you like to hear it? Wait a second. This is a poem that won me a seat to space. Would you like to hear it? Yeah, right? Like, how often does that happen? Okay, this is the poem that I wrote. It's called Space to Inspire. Okay. You've got space. I've got space. We all have space to inspire. That's why we dream of going higher and higher. But what is space if you can't breathe? Let's stop sucking out the air of our humanity. We have a moment to seize the light. Earth from space, both day and night. We have J for justice to ignite the bold. We have E for equity to cut past the old. We have D for diversity to end the fight. We have I for inclusion to try to make it right. A Jedi space to rally behind, a universal force so big it binds. Inspiration to change the world. A new beginning for us to hold. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about space to inspire for all of humanity. Science, technology, engineering, and math, sending us out on the explorer's path. But don't forget the arts, the heartbeat of time. Consider sending a poet who knows how to rhyme. So let us drop the mic and close the capsule door, but please make sure Dr. Proctor is on board. My space to inspire is what we need, inspiration for all of humanity. That was the poem that I read that won me a seat to space. Thank you. So now, a lot of you are probably thinking, okay, so in 2021, you submit a video, a poem on Twitter that wins you a 3-day trip to space. What does that actually mean and look like? This is what I won.
The reason I started SpaceX was to get humanity to Mars. We want to try to make the dream of space accessible to anyone, and ultimately making science fiction not fiction forever.
What they're about to do will change the game entirely. 4 civilians are going to space. They will orbit the Earth for 3 days.
On their own.
You know, my dream of always wanting to go to space. I wanted to let you know that I got selected.
They start telling me about this all-civilian mission to space.
How many astronauts are going? And that's when she said, none. Haley was diagnosed with bone cancer.
I haven't died, and I'm not going to die.
Having cancer made me who I am.
My dream is to be a nurse.
I'm getting to show them what their life can look like after cancer. If I can do it, you can definitely do it.
I went upstairs after the phone call, though, and told my wife, I think I'm gonna ride a rocket. And she just, what?
I don't think I'll think about the worldly impact this mission is going to have until Chris is back on the ground.
I'm like, why would they choose me? Look at that. But my dad had instilled this idea in me that I could do anything.
I'm commander of Inspiration 4. No matter what, I'm a father first, and that comes with a great deal of responsibility.
What is the speed?
25 times the speed of sound, or 17,500 miles an hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's getting real.
Our mission to space had to serve a bigger purpose, which is why it's a $200 million fundraising campaign for the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital.
There have been 3 Black female American astronauts who have made it to space. I will be number 4.
Start thinking about what could happen and the risks that are involved.
These people are you and me, and they will kick the doors open to space for the rest of us.
This is where we're going to live for 3 days.
Home sweet home.
So that is what I won with my Twitter entry. 3 days to space with this amazing crew. Again, we didn't know each other, but this was all the result of Jared Isaacman. So Jared, and that's my crew on the right-hand side there. Jared is the tall guy in the back. Jared's a billionaire, very successful, wanted to go to space, so he reached out to SpaceX and bought out an entire Dragon capsule. And then he, instead of going to space, the most dangerous thing that you can do, he instead of going with his family or his friends, he decided to give the seats away. And he decided that if he was going to have the privilege of going to space, that he was also going to do good on Earth. And so he reached out to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and said two things. I'm going to do the largest fundraiser in your history. I'm going to raise $200 million to help end childhood cancer. And two, I want to fly a childhood cancer survivor, Haley Arsenault. She is next to Jared there. She was gifted the Hope Seat from St. Jude. When she was 10 years old, she was diagnosed with cancer in her leg. St. Jude saved her life. It made such an impression on her as when she grew up. She became a physician's assistant, and today she still works at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. So she represents hope. Chris Simbrowski, remember the second contest where if you donated to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, the generosity seat? Chris Simbrowski won the generosity seat, and I won the prosperity seat as an artist and a poet. And the four of us came together in March of 2021. We trained for 6 months with SpaceX. Again, this is not NASA. This is a commercial flight. We trained for 6 months. And when Jared told me the news that I had won the contest, the next thing he said to me was, and I want you to be my mission pilot. And I thought this, I'd only flown a Cessna 172. So I was like, really? You want me to be your mission pilot? So I became the mission pilot, and he's the commander. And so I trained for that position within 6 months. And so you can see some of the things that we did during our training. And then at the end, it's ready to launch to space. Now, SpaceX Dragon capsule was designed to take NASA astronauts to the International Space Station and back. But we were going to go and live in the Dragon capsule for 3 days. We were not going to the International Space Station, so we were going to live and do all of our work in the Dragon capsule. And we were the 4th ever human launch by SpaceX. And so that is the Dragon capsule. And at the top there, you see this dome thing? That's not normal. SpaceX created the largest, most continuous window ever flown in space specifically for our mission because we weren't docking at the International Space Station. That is normally where you would dock to the ISS, but we weren't docking. So SpaceX was like, well, why don't we build you a giant window so you can look out at Earth? And we were like, okay, that sounds great. So that was our Dragon capsule. And so what happens after 6 months, you get ready to go to space. And that day comes, September 15th. And this is Haley
went up a
and me.
flight of stairs, and now they are making their way through the crew access arm.
So
that is the
day we're
corridor that
launching
you
to
see on
space.
screen right now.
And what a sight to see with them hugging as they're walking. Oh, they look so excited.
So these are essentially the last steps that they will take on planet Earth for the next 3 days. Obviously taking a moment to enjoy the view, smell the roses if there were any.
So that was Haley and I, our last moments before going into the Dragon capsule and preparing to launch to space. And so you can see Haley is there in the right seat, far right. My commander, Jared, is there. Then me as the mission pilot is next. And then Chris Simbrowski is on my right there, the left of the screen as a mission specialist. Now, me and Jared, we're sitting in the middle because above us are actually the flight computer screens that I will use to monitor and he will use to look and monitor what's happening with the flight. So this next photo is what it looks like from our vantage point. So in this photo, now keep in mind, this photo was taken 14 minutes before liftoff. So this was taken from the live stream, the SpaceX live stream, right before we launched to space. So on the left is Jared, and on the right is me in this photo. So I want you to think about this and imagine you're sitting in the Dragon capsule and it's counting down to 0 and you're about to launch to space. And you know what the number one question I get from people? It is, when I was sitting in that capsule about to blast off, was I afraid? Was I afraid to go? Think about this. Would you be afraid to go? My answer is always no. I was ready. I was ready to go. And as it counts down, think about this. We're sitting on top of a Falcon 9 rocket, the Dragon capsule, and it counts down to 0. And all of a sudden, the Dragon comes to life. And you feel the thrust pull you back in your seat. As the rocket starts to lift off the pad, and everyone you know and love is there, watching as your childhood dream comes to life.
Copy that, Dragon. And it has been an absolute honor to prepare you for this historic flight. Today, you are truly inspiring the world. We wish you a great mission, good luck, Godspeed, and enjoy the ride.
We launched to space on September 15th, 2021 from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Launch pad 39A, the same launch pad that sent the Apollo astronauts to the moon. And as our Falcon 9 rocket lifted off of the pad at 8 p.m. at night, just after sunset, it literally lit the sky, turning night into day. And then 10 minutes later, you're in space. 10 minutes, that's all it takes to get to space. Think about how long it took you to get here today. Space actually isn't that far away. It just takes a lot of energy to lift off of Earth's gravity well. And so we get into space and we're there for 3 days. And a lot of times people are like, what was your favorite moment? There's so many favorite moments in space. But remember that giant cupola, that continuous window? This is one of my favorite moments because we're going to open what's called the forward hatch. We're going to open the forward hatch and we're going to see the Earth for the first time through that window. Now, you're not going to see me in the video because I'm taking the video. We had iPhones. So I'm taking the video because I wanted to capture this moment. In my mind, I was like, this is a historic moment. I got to capture this. And so I want you to watch Haley. Haley is going to be floating there in space, and she has a job to do. She's going to start pulling out this white ribbon, and her job is to put this white ribbon around the forward hatch after we open it to protect it. But there's going to be a moment when Haley's floating there, and she's going to look up, and she's going to see the Earth, and just watch the expression on her face. And then not only did we have iPhones, but we had iPads. So I queued up some special music that you're going to hear. Now this music was playing live in space because I wanted to have special music. Some of you will recognize this music. It's very historic. Some of you are a little young, might not recognize it. But this is the moment we saw Earth from space through our forward hatch in that beautiful dome.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
I love the fact that Haley completely forgot she had a job to do. We were all like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And then what was it like? Well, you could float up into this cupola. So you can imagine that I'm floating here, taking this video, and this is what I got to see. We were 585 kilometers above the Earth's surface. We were higher than the International Space Station. We were higher than the Hubble telescope. And that was the view from our cupola, that giant continuous window that SpaceX made for us specifically for our flight. And you learn that the Earth is stunningly beautiful. When you look at it from space and you have that orbital perspective, it literally changes you. And so for me as a geologist, a geoscientist, it was a transformative moment because here I am up in the cupola, but what I realized at this moment was that all the light on my face was Earth light. Think about that, Earth light. We learn about sunlight, we learn about moonlight, but we never, ever learn about Earth light, the most beautiful light there is. Our planet takes sunlight and it transforms it into Earth light by absorbing it and scattering it and reflecting it, and a lot of that comes back to you. A lot of that energy comes back to you when you're in low Earth orbit. And like I said, all of the light on my face, that's all Earth light. None of it was sunlight. And so that made such an impact on me that I came back from space. I never thought I would write a science book, but I wrote a science book called Earthlight as a result of that experience, that discovery for myself. And so, but, what are we here to talk about? We're going back to eating in space. Eating in space, because now I got the opportunity to eat in space. Now you can imagine when we were training for space, SpaceX they first sat us down and prepared a meal of things we could test. And it was weird stuff. It was things like meal cubes and stuff that were highly nutritious, that would keep you alive. And we were like, what is this? We were tasting and we're like, wow. I kind of felt bad for the guy because we were like, no. Everything that they put in front of us, they were like, no, we're not going to eat this. And it goes to that question again of, what would you want to eat in space? Take a moment and think about that. If you could eat anything in space, what would you want to eat? Because we rejected all of that healthy, nutritious stuff that SpaceX wanted to give us, they asked us that question. They said, what would you like to eat in space? Because my commander, Jared's like, we're going up there for 3 days. We don't need to be healthy. We're going up there for 3 days. Like it's camping in space, right? You don't have to worry about nutrition for 3 days. So now you've got this opportunity to say, well, what would you want to eat in space? Think about that. And for us, the one thing unanimous across the crew that we all wanted as part of our meal was bacon. That's bacon floating in space. So bacon was a big part. I had an amazing BLT sandwich that SpaceX made for me. But the big thing that I really wanted to eat was pizza, because pizza's my favorite food. Did anybody, when they said, what would you want to eat in space, think pizza? Because if you did, you're right there with me, because I was like, I want pizza. And SpaceX made me pizza. So I had pizza in space. But one of the fun things, of course, when you're floating in space is the fact that you can play with your food. Not only just floating bacon, but like this is Skittles. And so you can pass M&Ms and Skittles to your friends and stuff like that. And so when we're thinking about food and space and comfort food, you got to remember, again, food and mood are tied together. And if you go to space and they feed you food that you don't want to eat, think about the time when you've had that one meal where you're like, I don't want to eat this. Like, you're going to make me eat this? I don't want to eat this. And how that psychologically plays on you. And that's one of the reasons why we think about the importance of food when we're going and doing dangerous things like going to space. So after 3 days, we splashed down. And so this is our actual capsule coming back and splashing off the coast of Florida. And there's a point where it braced for impact. And I remember, our capsule hit the water and we bounced back up. And I felt that amazing relief because your mission isn't complete until you splash down. Because there's all of these opportunities for something to go wrong and you potentially lose your life. So when you see those 4 healthy mains, and you're about to splash down as the mission pilot, I was like, yes, because you knew you weren't going to hit the water and die, right? Because you had 4 healthy mains. And then you hit the water, you bounce back up, and you're like, yes, I went to space successfully. And then when you return, the next thing is you got to egress out of the capsule. And that's one of the most, just as much of launching and how happy you are when you launch to space, you're just as equally happy when you return back to Earth, because your mission was complete.
And here comes Dr. Sian Proctor.
There she is, excited as ever. Dr. Sian Proctor. Oh, I love it. Love it.
Just strutting on down.
I know, no problem at all.
And now keep in mind, the fact that we had that successful mission, that moment when you complete your mission and you're coming out of the capsule, that was a special moment for me because I had become, at that moment, I had successfully become the first woman commercial spaceship pilot and the only African-American woman to ever be a mission pilot. And as a result of that, my SpaceX spacesuit that you saw me wearing, next week I'm flying to Washington, D.C. because my spacesuit, my SpaceX spacesuit, is going on display at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. as a result of this mission. Thank you. But thinking about, again, going back to this question of the future of food in space, when we think about food in space, a lot of times we're thinking about growing food, right? This is a picture of International Space Station, Jessica Watkins, amazing geoscientist, NASA astronaut. She launched the space after me. And there she is growing food in space. But the problem is, right now we're just testing this. We don't have the ability to scale that up. We can't create enough fresh food in space. We don't know how to successfully create enough fresh food on the moon and Mars. We don't know how to do that right now. So what does that mean? It means that we're going to use food engineering and technology to be able to feed us for the future. And so when you're thinking about food engineering, that changes things, right? You got to start thinking about, what does it mean to be shelf stable? What does it mean to be time efficient? What does it mean to use cutting edge technology to be able to feed the capacity of people who are going to be going to the moon and Mars? And so this is some of the things that people are thinking about. How many of you have heard of Soylent?
So what are you trying to do here?
We're trying to make food better. We wanted to see what a balanced diet entails and then meet those requirements as elementally as possible.
So elementally, you mean sort of molecular nutritional level of the product?
Exactly. Goal was to use science to improve the food system.
Whatever you put in here, you want to say it's better than like the whole meal I just had? I had like eggplant parmesan last night.
Well, it depends what you're optimizing for.
Optimized for pleasure. How about that?
This may not be the most pleasurable meal in the galaxy.
Okay.
However, it is very functional.
Functional food.
Right. Ever since food fortification from a generation ago. I mean, iodized salt, fortified rice, cereal, even macaroni and cheese has to be fortified.
Yeah, it's all the grains.
Nutritional deficiencies used to be just part of life, and now they're gone.
They're gone completely.
Just gone.
This is an engineering problem.
Right.
A food engineering problem.
Food engineering problem, and it's a very complex problem. I mean, it's pretty astounding that we can make something like this that will sit on a shelf without refrigeration for a year.
So think about that. Functional food. Everything that you need to survive, you drink in a bottle. How tasty does that sound, right? Last night when I went to my hotel room, The Matrix was on. How many of you love that movie, The Matrix? One of my favorite movies. And I love this scene right here where Keanu Reeves, he's eating this stuff and he's just like, oh. And the other guy is like, it's everything you need to survive. It may not taste good, but it's everything you need to survive. And when you think about this movie, Matrix, the guy who was the bad guy in the crew, the only thing he wanted to do was be plugged back into the Matrix so he could eat a steak, so that he could have good food again, even if it wasn't real, right? And so that whole idea of functional food versus food for pleasure, and how much pleasure we get by eating food. And so when we're thinking about this engineering impact, we got to think about the fact that it's processed food, the vitamins, are we losing vitamins or we have to enhance it? What is the taste versus the texture? Where does creativity come in? Where does food culture come in? Where is our heritage in food? These are the things that you can't have when you are making that engineered food. But I want to take this as I wrap up, because I want to give some time for questions. I want to take it away from food for space. Food for space, we know it's going to be engineered. We know we're going to have some things that we're going to challenge us. But the more important part is, how does solving for space solve for Earth around food? As we go to the moon and Mars, it's all about efficiency in food, water, energy, resource, and waste management. We are making cutting-edge decisions about food for the future. But that cutting-edge decision and resources have to come back to Earth to make us more efficient. And what I mean by that, do you realize how many people go hungry in the world, even though we produce enough food to feed everyone? Remember that. We produce enough food to feed everyone in the world. We don't have a food problem. We have a food distribution problem. We have a food waste problem. Do you know how much food we waste every year? And the United States is at the top of that level of food waste, right? When 1 in 7 go hungry when we make enough food. So how can we solve this using space technology? Let's go back to that food preservation, freeze-dried technology. Right now, we are starting to see the change where we move away from frozen food to freeze-dried food because we can preserve it for up to a decade. Think about that. Freeze-dried, this is an example of dehydrated corn versus freeze-dried corn, and that process of sublimation and how it leaves more nutrients than when you dehydrate it. Here's an example of a frozen blueberry versus a freeze-dried blueberry. Now think about that blueberry. From the moment you pick the blueberry, if you're going to freeze that blueberry, you're going to freeze it. Make frozen fruit. You have to put energy in the system to keep that blueberry frozen all the way along the distribution. So you pick the blueberry somewhere in like South America, you freeze it. You put it on a shipping container that has to be frozen. You get it to the supermarket, it has to be frozen there. And then you bring it home and it has to be frozen. Or we will pick food before it's ripe from halfway around the world and ship it to someplace. Is food actually fresh if it comes from halfway around the world? Instead of putting that energy and that water and that weight into the food system, we need to freeze dry it at its source, leave the water at its source, and ship just the nutrients. And so I came up with this concept called Eat Like a Martian. Taking freeze-dried, that's freeze-dried fruits, meats, and vegetables on the left, and then you rehydrate them when you're ready to use them. And you use just the amount that you need instead of wasting. And so this whole idea of eating like a Martian is combining fresh, locally sourced meats and fruits and vegetables, locally sourced, and you combine them with freeze-dried fruits, meats, and vegetables from around the world. So if it comes from halfway around the world, we shouldn't be shipping it frozen, and we shouldn't be shipping it fresh. Instead, we should freeze-dry it and ship it to where it needs to be. And if we could learn to combine these two things, think about how we could potentially feed the world and reduce the energy cost and the waste associated with food. And so in my house, I actually have a pantry. That's actually a picture on the right from my pantry. And so the whole idea of Eat Like a Martian is using technology from space. And I want you to think about that. Could you eat like a Martian? Why or why not? Something to think about. And then what food habits do you think we will bring to the moon and Mars? Those are two questions I want you to think about as you leave today. Is like, could you eat like a Martian? And what? And of course, what would you want to eat in space? So I want to thank you for coming and listening to my talk about my space story. And I'm going to be outside with my 2 books if you'd like to come and chat with me and pick up one of these. But in the next 10 minutes, we're going to take questions if you have any. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Proctor, for the wonderful sharing. Here comes to the Q&A session. You can scan the QR code here to submit your question. And I've already got some questions here. So, NASA works hard to keep astronauts from getting sick from food. What do you think are the biggest challenges to keep space food safe during long missions far from Earth?
I think one of the biggest issues is you really have to control the supply chain from farm to space, right? Because anywhere along the way, you can have the potential for contamination and things like that, especially when you're dealing with, if you're going to do fresh foods, you got to be able to make sure that it's not contaminated along that whole logistic supply chain. And so that's one of the reasons why NASA came in and made a lot of regulations in the United States about how food is distributed and moved. And that's why we're not as sick as much from food anymore, is because of a lot of those regulations that came in. But I think the big thing is that again, when you can think about how can you put food in a form that helps reduce the microbes, that's how you reduce people from getting sick, because it's really the microbes that are growing on food that get you sick and not the food itself. And that's why freeze-dried technology, it's going to be something that is going to be a big part of us on the moon and Mars, because you're shipping it in a form that makes it shelf-stable for such a long time. Now, when I grew up, you'd never see freeze-dried available in the grocery store, but now I'm starting to see, I see freeze-dried fruits all the time in the grocery store, and it's only a matter of time that we're going to start seeing more freeze-dried vegetables and then eventually freeze-dried meats. So again, that technology is slowly infiltrating the way we operate here on Earth, and it's going to be part of the food culture for space. Absolutely.
Thank you. So how important is it to have food that matches astronaut cultures and tastes for the mental health for on long missions? Do you have any stories from your crew about this?
Yes, it's super important that you are able to provide food that fits the culture and the habits of the astronauts. And that's one of the reasons why NASA has it where you can, because it's international crew on the International Space Station, that you can, when they do a resupply mission, you can have special food sent to you. and think about that. You know, if you can have that one thing that you're craving from when you were a kid up in space with you, and you're up there for 8 or 9 months or a year, and that resupply ship comes in, and you know that that's on there, and how that makes you feel. So it's one of those things that we realize it's super important that you take in account food culture, how you provide that, how you maintain that, and then also how that impacts the mood of the astronaut. And so when we go on to the moon and Mars, and some of you that raised your hand and said, I would go to space, the amazing thing is more people are going to space than ever, and that's only going to increase as the technology becomes more available. And so that means that there's going to be a future where regular people are actually going to eventually go to the moon and Mars. And that means that, again, if you're going to go to the moon and Mars, what do you want to eat there? And we're going to want to see our culture and our food represented there. And that's it's critical.
Thank you. So another question from Kathy, it's quite personal. What did you have for your first meal after coming down from space? Was there an adaptation period?
No, it's funny. When we came off of the ship, you know, and I'm like, yay, and everybody's like, yay. They had a bucket of fried chicken waiting for us. Fried chicken was waiting for us on. And so Haley, I don't even think Haley, she had chicken in her mouth like 2 minutes after getting out of her spacesuit, because you're just like, you know, again, food that you want to eat. Again, I had pizza up in space, but you come back and you're just like, wait a second, I want a salad. You know, you don't have salad up in space. You know, you want these things that are just foods that you've loved to eat. And so fried chicken is what the crew voted on to have waiting for us. And so a lot of times when you splash down, they'll have food waiting for you that you can request. And ours was fried chicken. So you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait at all.
Thank you. So some of our audience also curious about your life on the capsule. Can you tell us about the teamwork and challenges you and your crew faced during those days in the capsule?
Yes. Okay. So again, we weren't going to the International Space Station, which is the size of a football field. Instead, literally the Dragon capsule was from like here to about here widthwise, and we had volume to about not quite the ceiling. So 4 people lived in a very, very confined space for 3 days. But keep in mind, now you can float, so you can be in all different orientations. But our crew motto was, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Get comfortable, because in order to use a bathroom, we had what was called a privacy curtain that you strung across, and so the person's changing, floating right there, changing or using the bathroom, and you're here. You can hear everything, you know, like there's not a wall. There are no walls. And so so you've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that's where crew cohesion comes in. My commander Jared did a very good job of making us 4 strangers, didn't know each other, come together and get that bond so that we could go and do that and be successful. And so you think about, if you were to pick just 4 people randomly here, would you be able to bond and go to space and be successful? And so when you think about the fact that as a billionaire, he had a choice. He could have flown to space with his buddies. He could have flown to space with his friends. He chose to give the seats away to strangers because he knew the impact and the significance of it and why it was important. And so that's one of the things. But no, we had to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. We did a lot of science when we were up there. We had a really busy schedule, and I got to paint in space as an artist and a poet. I drew and painted, which was amazing. But we also had a fire alarm, a waste fan alarm that went off, and we had to like do stuff. And the two worst things that can happen in space are a fire and a cabin depressurization. Luckily, it wasn't serious. It wasn't an actual fire. We were able to mitigate it. But again, those are the risks you take when you go to space. And it's so important. Our training kicked right in. Everybody did what they needed to do. And with SpaceX, we were able to mitigate and continue our mission.
Thank you. So the last question is that how did living inside the Dragon capsule for 3 days compare to what you expected about being in space?
Oh man, it was awesome. Let me tell you, for interviewers that are like, I want to go to space, 5 days, not 3. 3's not enough. You need 5 days, okay? So make sure you request 5. And the reason why is this. Everybody has some space adaptation. The minute you get on orbit, like literally when they cut the engines, you're floating. So what does that mean? Your spine elongates, your fluids shift, your head, you might get a headache, you might feel nauseous. I felt sick when I first got on orbit. I didn't throw up, but there's another thing. A lot of times people are like, oh, I get motion sickness, I could never go. Half the astronauts that go to space get sick, right? But we got a saying, better living through chemistry. You can take medicine. So you get on orbit, you're not feeling good, you take medicine. So I took some medicine, felt better. But that first day, you're like a deer in the headlights. You're like, whoa, this is crazy. I'm floating. I don't feel so good. And then the second day, you're feeling better. And you're like, ooh, this is kind of cool. And then the third day, you're like spinning. You're like, wow, this is the best thing ever. And SpaceX is like, time to come home. You're like, no, I want to stay a couple more days. Like, this is great. And so that's one of the things is that the 3 days, it goes quick. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of astronauts, like for me, your brain doesn't know how to categorize it. So when I landed back on Earth, my brain was like, was that real? Like, I know it happened. I know I went. But your brain is like, you're floating in space looking at the Earth. And now keep in mind, you're in the right orientation. You feel like you're right side up, but you're inverted to the Earth, so the Earth is above you. And your brain is like, what's going on here? Because this is not something that humans are supposed to do. We're not supposed to have that, but we can because of our innovation and ingenuity. But your brain is like, think about this. Think about the best dream you've ever had. The best dream that you woke up to and you're like, oh, I want to go back to bed. I want to go back to sleep. How do I get back to that dream? That's what it feels like for me now. Even though it was real, it feels like, whoa, did that happen? How do I get back to that feeling of floating and seeing the Earth and being there? How do I get back to that? It's that longing that you have inside you and that calling. And that's why those of you that didn't raise your hand, maybe I can convince you should raise your hand because it feels going to space is nothing like it.
Thank you for sharing such a fascinating journey with us.